We were in Southeast Asia for a post-season tour a couple of days after he'd heard he was getting the sack. I was on the sun lounger by the pool when I saw Sven walking towards me. He was carrying a silver tray with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses on it. It was still only 10 o'clock in the morning. Sven came over, put the champagne on the table next to me, and then placed 1 glass in front of me and the other by his lounger. I looked up and said, "Boss, what are we celebrating?" He turned to me and smiled that gentle smile of his and took on the air of a Buddhist philosopher as he said, "We're celebrating life, Kaiser. We're celebrating life." Hello and welcome to Maybe in Another Generation. On this week's episode, I am absolutely delighted to be chatting to Liam Wright, who is not only a good mate of mine, but someone who has followed City home and away, week in, week out for the last 20 years. So welcome to a good friend of mine and a huge Manchester City fan, someone who's been there, seen it, done it, been home and away for the last 20 odd years. And I'm delighted to welcome Liam Wright to Maybe in Another Generation. You all right, mate?
I'm very good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, all good indeed. All good indeed. So the first question we always ask our guests is, why are you a Manchester City fan?
So, I think like a lot of people, it sort of starts with the family. I'm quite fortunate, I suppose. I didn't think I'd say this years ago, but I'm quite fortunate that both my dad's and mum's side are both City fans and match going as well. My dad, for many years, used to stand or sit next to my mum's brother as well at the match. So I didn't really have a choice, to be honest, apart from just not liking football at all. It was always going to be, going to be a City fan because of how passionate everyone in my family was, really.
Brilliant. And so how long was that? When was your first game? While you've been at Blue?
Yeah, so first game I can remember going to was quite a famous one, or infamous one, I should say, really. I went to the Cardiff away FA Cup game in 1994.
My word.
Yeah, so a bit of a baptism of fire. It's some of my first real memories, full stop, let alone memories of being at the football, is my dad sort of keeping my head like below a skip, whilst we were sort of hiding behind a skip whilst there were police on horseback sort of hitting people and things like that. So that was the first game that I went to. But the first games I really remember, because I don't remember much about Nathan Blake scoring that penalty against us, but I have watched it since.
Yeah. Horrendous. Lovely kit though. We were wearing a lovely kit that day. That's about it.
Yeah. But I remember first games I really remember was around October 1994. So sort of 9-10 months later, I went to for better reasons, but a famous 5-2 victory against Tottenham. I remember that quite vividly. That's really the first memories I have of being a City fan and going to the match, really.
Brilliant. And then obviously that's developed. And when did you start to go like regular? I'm assuming it was around this season that we're going to cover in it.
So I started going to home games a lot around that sort of time that I just mentioned there, like 94, 95. So we were going quite a lot in that Division 2 season to home games and quite a lot of away games as well. But then again in the sort of Joe Royal Championship season, that was my first year as a season to get older. But really, it was for the next sort of 6-7 years, it was a case of I would need to go to the dentist every sort of couple of weeks, which was code for my dad picking me up from my school at about 1:30 and driving all the way to Manchester and back, which was basically like a 6 or 7 hour round trip to go watch us play Millwall at home and things like that. And just when I sort of got to being about 18, when I sort of had a bit of my own money and my parents were quite happy for me to just go and do my own thing, I definitely remember it was about this sort of time 20 years ago, so I would have been 18, going to West Ham away on my own. Because the thing is, like, apart from going with my dad, and my dad wasn't that arsed about going to all the away games at that stage, but I didn't have any friends who were City fans because I've grown up down south. I was
down south, yeah.
But then the following September, I went to university. So that was really when I started to go, not just the home games, but
Stuart Pearce season.
Yeah, so that last season, which I think we'll probably come back to that quite a bit throughout the questions about this season, because the context of it all was really key. Because what made the season we're going to talk about so good was how poor that season was. But at the same time, I was 18, 19. absolutely in love with City and the players for reasons I look back on. I don't really know why, but they were my team, and because it made it so much easier to get, because I was at university in Sheffield, made it so much easier to get to home games compared to coming all the way up from Bedfordshire. I remember going to, it was the first ever game at the Emirates that season. I remember getting a ticket, but it was through someone through the Blue Moon Forum. Managed to get one, sort of sent to me in the post, which I remember like getting it sent to me at my university halls, and it came the morning of the game. I remember like literally getting there and just driving straight to London from there.
Amazing. And would it be fair to say, before we get stuck into the season in question, would it be fair to say that since then you've pretty much been in most games for the last 20 years?
Yeah, there or thereabouts. I think.
What's the most you've done in a season?
So, just talking the league, all league games, I've done 2 full seasons.
Amazing.
I did the full 2010-11 season. So the season we won the FA Cup. I went to every league game that season. I went to all the cup games as well. Just I didn't go to Aris or Kiev. I think they were the only 2 I missed that season. And then I went to, out of the 61 games in the treble season, I went to 59 of them.
Outstanding. That is amazing.
Yeah, so the only ones I didn't go to there were, I didn't go to Seville because I was going on a stag do to Lisbon the following day, and I didn't go to Dortmund as well away that season as well.
Brilliant. So the season that you have chosen, right, is 2007-2008. Now, of all of the trophy-laden seasons that you just referenced then of the last few years, you're taking us back 18 years. So why on earth have you chosen this one?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd say it's mostly the context of it all, I suppose, in that, I was 19, I turned 20 during that season, so I was having the time of my life, at university, having, going out all the time and, having fun, let's just say. And, I was sort of, gone from being some kid that lived in a village in the middle of nowhere to living in the centre of Sheffield and like just having the time of my life. But then also with the season that City had, it's a really interesting season because it is very much a season of 2 halves, but also, as I mentioned a little earlier, the context of how bad things were the previous season.
Oh, Christ.
Really, and I know we'll sort of speak about the games in particular, but the first game of the season away at West Ham, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. 5 years feels like a very long time because it is like a quarter of your life. And all the joy and all the good stuff regarding like the Keegan season in Division 1 just felt like it was like a different lifetime. I think as well, moving from Main Road to the Etihad, as we call it now, City of Manchester Stadium, as it was at the time, it did feel very much like a different club. I guess all the hope and optimism that we had going into the stadium, especially with that last season at Main Road as well, not just the players we bought, but finished 9th in the league. You just felt like we'd all been, and we'd had 5 or 6 years of promotions, relegations, but it felt like we were just going from strength to strength, really. And it really dropped off a cliff, and it sort of kept on dropping. And then, we end up in the 2006-07 season where we scored 10 goals at home all season, which, 10 goals in 19 games is
it's just joyless, wasn't it? It was just absolutely joyless. Really
joyless. We had, for most of the season, 4 strikers that didn't ever look like being goal scorers. Darius was so hard working, but he wasn't a goal scorer. Samaras was expensive and just generally just not cut for the physicality of the Premier League. I don't really know what Bernardo Corradi did. Generally, he wasn't physical enough. He was slow, and he didn't look like he had a goal in him. And we all love Paul Dickoff. However, I would argue that he wasn't first choice for City when we were in Division 2. Not when he's 35 and we're trying to stay in the Premier League.
Correct.
So we just didn't look creative, but we had a good defence. Distan and Dunn had been playing together for a couple of years, but the games were just really dull. We played a very sort of rigid 4-5-1 sort of system where we just had a load of cloggers in midfield. We brought in Darbo, who was shit, and Haman looked like he was past it. And really, the only sort of few of the kids looked great. Joey Barton had a great season that year. Well, he was our top scorer. I wouldn't say he had a great season, but he was our top scorer that season. You had flashes of Stephen Ireland as he was balding, looking good. And then, Micah Richards and Nader Manua were 2 really sort of exciting young players. But the rest of it was pretty forgettable.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Pearce brought in Milan Penza and Michael Bull in sort of I think they were both free agents, and they came in like sort of February time. And if it wasn't for those two players, I have no doubt we would have gone down that year.
100%. And Penta got a few, didn't he? A few crucial ones at I remember Newcastle away, he got one. And he bailed us out a couple of times.
Yeah, we had 3 away games on the spin. We had Newcastle, Middlesbrough, and Fulham away, where we won all 3 of them. And basically, he played up front, and he. I was just talking about all the kids. I didn't even mention Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson came into that team, and he just looked like a Rolls Royce. He looked like he was going to go.
Well, we'll talk about him in a minute.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. Yeah, but so a big reason why looking at this season was because the context of how bad the year before was, and how it just felt like, and as well, and I'm sure there would be fans of other clubs that would not agree with what I'm about to say here, but I can only speak from my perspective. I felt like that season under Pearce, like looking outside of the City bubble a little bit, was probably the furthest it felt that the top 4 teams were away from the rest of the league. You'd had a few years of Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, and United either winning the league or getting to Champions League finals or semi-finals. And apart from Everton, who'd got into 4th maybe 2 years earlier, it just felt like they were so much bigger and better. And you could still beat them on your day at home, but going away to those places was a waste of time. And feeling like you're never going to see any glory because the rest of the teams at the top are so much better than the rest of us.
And we'll come on to it now, is that you've set the scene perfectly in terms of prior to that season, how we found the team. The club was absolutely broke. And that was always never far away from the newspapers. We were always being told how skint we were. And then a big change took place. What are your recollections of June 2007?
So I would say the biggest things I remember was there was just a lot of talk about what was going to happen, because there'd been sort of AGMs at City where I think Wardle had said that he was happy to sell the club if the right person came in, and we sacked Pearce, but without really knowing who we were going to get in. And I mentioned him a moment ago. Sylvain Distin was one of our, over the previous sort of 4 or 5 years, have been one of our best performers, and he was leading the club to join Portsmouth. And it's pretty weird to say 18 years later that Portsmouth were seen as a club that with more ambition than City, but that's the way things were. The name that kept on coming up was Dr. Taskin Shinawatra, who obviously had, let's just say, an interesting past. I know there was at one point he was linked with buying Liverpool at one point, but I think the thing is we were so desperate, and it felt like the club were, on like life support sort of.
We were just begging to the point where anyone would do.
Exactly, yeah, definitely. So when someone came in to purchase the club, who had £2 billion, then you just think, well, hopefully this is a lifeline for us, because
although whose £2 billion it was, we'll never find out. But we're not quite sure it was his, but he said it was his.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he let us spend a bit of it anyway, so that'll do me.
Well, we'll come to that. So he joined us, and he set about recruiting one of our most beloved and most famous of managers, who, despite not being here very long, will always be cherished in the hearts of City fans. So again, talk to us about when our manager was announced, who it was and what the reaction was.
It was a weird reaction, really, because I think the thing is, and as you always like to point out, Merd, I'm quite a fan of England as a national team, and there's no way of dressing up. Sven hadn't had a successful time managing England, and the summer of 2007, you're only 12 months out from a pretty drab collection of performances at the 2006 World Cup, where England went out on penalties. So there was a bit of, I guess people have short-term memories that, he'd been a really top manager for Lazio before he came to England. And he'd had probably like 20 years experience before all then when he was managing. So it was a bit of a mixed reaction. But I think the thing is that for City fans, I think we were pleased because it was somebody who was, a lot more qualified to take the club forward than what we'd had previously in Stuart Pearce, who we all liked Stuart Pearce at the time because he captained the club under Keegan. He was a passionate sort of guy, and he always sort of spoke well of City, which is mad, really, considering that he doesn't say anything nice about it these days.
It doesn't.
But no, but Sven just seemed to be a really. I don't think everyone saw it this way, but I think a lot of City fans thought it was a good choice because not only was he a well-respected manager, in Europe especially, but I think the name would attract a lot of players, and that's eventually what we saw. That we not necessarily players who were doing anything in the Premier League, but sort of the players that wanted to come to us from over Europe were very much because of Sven being our manager, as opposed to the City played in a 48-seat stadium. Well, that's how it felt at the time, anyway.
Yeah, you're right, and also I think one of the other things that's really important to City fans is he was likeable. Now, a lot of City fans love Stuart Pearce. He was a national treasure, if you like. He was a fist bumper, but we'd seen enough. And like you say, the football was absolutely dreadful. Sven came in with a smile, almost like telling us everything's going to be all right, and we're going to enjoy ourselves again, and we're going to have a party, and it'll be great. Very much like his off the field shenanigans. And he always had a twinkle in his eye, and it just made us feel a little bit warmer. And then he joined, it got announced, and then all of a sudden we just had this raft of players. I remember that press conference where we just had 4 or 5 players lined up, but we actually signed 8 players that summer. And I know you are a font of all knowledge, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you name all 8 players that we signed that summer? Some belters, some people I still love now.
I could have a go at trying to name it in order, but I think it was Bianchi, Gelson Fernandez, Giovanni, Martin Petrov, Elano, Vedran Korluka, and Javier Garrido. Oh, is that all? Is that 8, or is anyone else there?
One more who fell by the wayside early, sadly, with a massively bad injury.
Valery Bojinov.
Yes, I mean, that is nobody I know would be able to name their 8 players. But,
no.
We had a brand new manager who we'd heard of. We had a load of good players, some I'd never heard of, some I had slight recollection of, and we go into the season. So, I mean, how did we start the season? What was your recollection? I know I'll start with one quote that was said to me by a mate once that said, that first game of the season was like watching your football team go from black and white into colour. Would you concur?
Very much so, yeah. But I'm just going to take a slight step back by a week here because you mentioned Taskin and the start of the season. And
I know what you're going to say. Say that and swear.
Yeah. The amount of things that get levelled at City regarding sports washing and things like that. I can remember being there with some food, a bottle of Singer beer with big screens saying "Long live the King of Thailand." And it was just surreal. And
just a regular day. Just a regular day in City's history.
Yeah, so that's quite funny that it doesn't really get mentioned enough that we had a real.
Was that a Valencia friendly? Was that a Valencia friendly? Did our hero play in that game?
David Silva scored the only goal in that game.
Dave played and Dave scored. Brilliant. The first game of the season away at West Ham, and someone had switched the colour on the remote, and tell us all about it. For a start, that kit, I'm sorry, it's up there.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It's for me. It's whenever people talk about favourite first games of the season, and whenever we played West Ham, I always think about that game because the weather was beautiful. A really hot, sunny day in London, and going to Upton Park, which was one of my favourite grounds to go to. Anyway. Being in the away end there, it was really hot. People taking the tops off and things like that because it was that hot. I didn't, but it was the atmosphere was great, and we had most of these new players starting for us that day, and it just couldn't believe the difference in how we were playing and how sort of simplistic it was as well. It was very much like whoever the goalkeeper. It was Kasper Schmeichel that day actually in goals. And he just quite calmly knocked it to Richard Dunn, who quite calmly knocked it to Didier Mann, who all of a sudden looked like the player that had played for Liverpool and Germany, who then found either Michael Johnson or Elano, who either found Bianchi or Petrov. There seemed to be an actual plan of how we're going to get up the pitch.
And an appetite to play forward.
Yeah, and not just hoofing it long and just having
Yeah.
players chasing after it.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
no one had. It was so difficult to have expectations because a lot of the team were players that you'd not really seen before. There was, I think that night on Match of the Day, there was a question to Sven about, how much had he actually seen of some of these players, which I think he called the reporter stupid, which was always made me laugh. Sort of some of the players that we'd had previously, as I mentioned, like Haman looked great, Michael Johnson looked great, Michael Richards looked just unbelievable. Looked like he was going to be the sort of the next big thing. I know it's like an oft piss-taking thing out of him these days about him breaking onto the scene or whatever he says. But he was unbelievable. He was a great
He was
player.
phenomenal. He was phenomenal.
Yeah,
we'll come to it in a second about the derby. But him and Dunn at centre halves were unbelievable. And I'm doing him a bit of a disservice, but as a centre half, I don't think he had to think as much. And I think he was unbelievable. And he had the pace and he had the strength. And Richard Dunn was always a lot better than outsiders made out. That too, as a defensive partnership, was phenomenal.
It just worked perfectly because even if, we got sort of pulled out of position slightly, a bit like Kyle Walker in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, his pace could just get you out of the shit. And that was the thing with Richards. His physicality, him as a athletic specimen could get us out of the shit at any time.
Easy.
And I think, as you mentioned there, Richard Dunn gets overlooked because I think, people see him as
he was quicker than people made out as well.
He was quick, but people see him as a bit of a climber, red card in waiting, own goals, But actually, as a footballer, he was pretty decent. He'd knock it about a bit. And I say physicality, he was as strong as anybody, and he was quick as well. So them two together, and I know I mentioned earlier about Distan. Obviously, we were missing now because he'd gone to Portsmouth. But a big reason why City had survived in the league over the last couple of years was down to how good the defence was. So Richard stepping in to sort of take Distan's place, I know on the right instead of the left, it just felt like it was there wasn't any. Didn't feel like there was anything that he had to sort of do to learn anything. It just seemed so natural. And then all the new players that came in, Vedran Korluka was just again a real Rolls Royce of a player. He never looked like he was sprinting, but he wasn't slow, if that makes sense. He got around the pitch well. There was later in the season he stepped into midfield as well, and he was great. And you could see that he was destined to play higher than where City
for a more ambitious club.
Which is why he probably played for Tottenham for 5 or 6 years when they were sort of there or thereabouts in the top four. And with Petrov and Alano, they were two players that had just loads of skill, just exciting to watch. Petrov was so direct that he just felt like from anywhere he could throw the ball in the box, and because we had someone like Bianchi up front, that he could get onto the end of it and things like that. So it was just a real change from what we've been watching the previous year, really.
Yeah, and obviously when you look at that start to the season, when you look at those first 3 games, which derby at home, you could say winnable.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind that we hadn't actually managed to win at home since New Year's Day, so that was like 8 months. To go away to West Ham and perform like we did and play football that put a smile on your face, then you play Derby and you win your first home game. And this is all prior to us playing United. We hadn't conceded a goal going into the Derby. What was the mood like amongst the fans? Was there hysteria? Was it more of a quiet, assured pleasure? Or was it a case of, there'll be another false dawn along the way? What was generally the thinking?
I think it was... I would say there was a bit of bubbling up hysteria. I'd say maybe not hysteria, but I think for those 2 games, we played really well against West Ham, against a good team. Derby they ended up being known as the worst team in Premier League history. But when a team gets promoted, they are playing with a lot more confidence than they will do later in the season. So it was their first away game in the Premier League for years, and it was not a particularly memorable game, but quite a memorable goal by Michael Johnson. It was
beautiful, outside of the boot.
Yeah, really good. He was really a special talent, wasn't he? But so I guess when it came to playing United on the Sunday, and for the context as well, I think United had drawn their first 2 games, I think. So I remember after the game, we were top and they were in the bottom three.
Beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
yeah. I mean, can't it be like that all the time? But
No.
so it was. I think again, we knew that we were onto something. So I wouldn't say it's quite hysteria. You did wonder because there were so many doubts from the outside coming into the season about, well, how are these players going to play together when they don't know each other, or but it felt like it clicked straight away. That you just felt like, well, this is the top team, So yeah,
And
it
a team
was
that's enjoying themselves as well.
definitely.
They looked like they wanted to play, and they looked like they wanted to get forward and express themselves.
Yeah, sure. And that United game as well. I suppose it's really known for sort of two or three things. It's known for the Giovanni goal, which was a great strike. I know it took a deflection, but it was a great strike from outside the area. It's known for Michael Richards defending, which I know we've just touched on. But yeah, I mean him against Tevez, who we all know how good Carlos Tevez was. And I can't think of too many times where we watched Carlos Tevez in a City shirt and he got marked the way that Richards marked him that day.
Yeah. Didn't he miss the sitter as well?
Yeah.
Didn't he miss the sitter?
So quite famously as well, at the end there, he was at the back post at a corner, and that's where old Bacon Face stood up as if he thought he'd gone in, and his arms dropped in stages.
You love to see it, don't you?
Oh, it was fantastic. But I mean, and as much as it pains you to say it, that was a really good United team.
Well, didn't they go on and win? Didn't they go on and win the big one that season?
They won the Premier League and the Champions League. They were the current champions. They won the league again. They won the Champions League, and I think they maybe lost the FA Cup semi-final to Everton. Maybe so they were a very good team, and we contained them in that game, and we got a famous win. So I think we knew I guess sensible City fans would have known that we're not going to go on and win the title that year, even though we were top of the league. But it was still just in the space of 8 days in 3 games. It was more good stuff happened then than it had for the whole previous 2 seasons.
And people have started to actually want to go to the Etihad or the City of Manchester Stadium then, rather than, because I know a lot of Blues who binned it off. Yeah, binned it off that final few months of Pearce's tenure.
So just going to say, I mean, obviously I've been talking right at the beginning of all this about how it was my dad that was taking me, and he'd actually given up his season ticket at the end of that Pearce season.
Don't blame him. So we had a brilliant start. 3 wins out of 3, no goals conceded. Everything's looking swimmingly. We've got Michael Richards and Dunny brilliant at the back. We've got Michael Johnson, who at that point was starting to get rave reviews and some really unrealistic comparisons to a former god at the club, Colin Bell, which was a little bit too far, but needless to say, he was having a great start to the season. Then how did the rest of the season, sort of the next few games, progress? Because from memory, we went on a bit of an unbeaten run, and there was obviously a couple of beauties from Alano against Newcastle and Borough. What's your recollection of that next set of games?
Again, I suppose a little bit like the first 3 games were like a real surprise, and it was you couldn't believe what you were seeing, sort of thing. But the sort of months of October and November are probably for me the happiest I've ever felt. No, maybe that's a bit unfair, but I remember going to the games, and I mean, you mentioned the Alano goals against Newcastle and Borough. It felt like it wasn't just a flash in the pan. These games that started the season, like we were actually really difficult to teams found it difficult to score against us, and we had goal scorers in the team. And if you've got that combination of players that can put the ball in the box, or a bit of magic like Alano had, where if you win a foul outside the area, then you're pretty confident you're going to score. And that Newcastle game was a real exciting game as well, because again they'd spent a lot of money. And they just brought Sam Allardyce in as well, which when things were going to shit with Pearce, a lot of people were saying that City should look at Allardyce to get to be City's next manager instead of Sven as well. So there was a lot of that going on at the time. But Sam, like I know him, Allardyce went to Newcastle. But it was just a real I can see myself after that Middlesbrough game getting the train back to Sheffield and reading King of the Kippax on the train and just being absolutely fucking buzzing that I was going to get home at like whatever it was, 6:30, and going out that night with all my mates at uni and whatever else.
What life!
I'd say it wasn't just 3 wins at the start of the season, then we tailed off. It felt like we were going on and on.
We kept going. Yeah,
Yeah,
we kept
the
going.
only thing was amongst all that, we did get absolutely hammered at Chelsea. But
Yeah, I've got it.
yeah,
I've got it on the list to chat about. So I mean,
yeah,
they were peak at the time. Obviously, they hadn't won the league, but they were still capable of handing out absolute good idings. But those Newcastle and Borough games, I remember it dead well because we just had our second child. I remember Newcastle had to watch on the TV, but Borough I went to.
Yeah.
I just think under Pearce, that free kick that had been dinked into the box. But Alano just had the confidence and just go and express yourself, smashed it in the top corner, which at that point was probably the best free kick I'd ever seen scored by a City player. And then that's prior to our golden generation. And then the Alano Borough, I think there was a volley and then another free kick, which was more of a dink over the top into the top corner. And I just think we're really continuing to express ourselves. And again, Michael Johnson was at the heart of that. And then I think at that point, I think we were 10 games in and we'd got 20 odd points. I mean, it's top flight. I don't think that had happened for about 30 or 40 years, certainly not in my lifetime as well. And people were thinking, all right, this is really good now. This isn't just about to come crashing down just yet. And not only that, though, everyone was dead happy. Everyone was really enjoying going to City and everyone was wondering, right, how are we going to play today? You know, who's going to be the star of the show? Is it going to be Petrov? Is it going to be Alano? Is it going to be Johnson? And we're all right at the back as well. Another classic goal at home to Reading.
Well, before then, you had the game at home to Sunderland. I know you were about to mention the Stephen Ireland last-minute winner against Reading, but you've also got against Sunderland, Stephen Ireland revealing his Superman underpants, which was
sensational. Ireland is Superman.
Yeah, you know that's where the famous chant came from with Ireland. So, yeah, again, it was one of them, and I think that game as well was the game where Foden was the mascot with Martin Petrov.
That's right, yeah. That's right.
So again, you know, very difficult. We were difficult to beat, unless you go to Stamford Bridge. But you know, you look at all the fixtures around there, and you know, we were keeping a lot of clean sheets. And even though you know we weren't hammering teams, but we were doing enough to win games. But yeah, the Reading game, when Ireland scores that last minute winner,
because we didn't score many last minute winners, really. We never, ever. If you ever thought City were going to lose, it's because they were going to lose. There was nothing ever that made you think we could just pull something out here. And then he just volleys it in from the edge of the area. One of the worst challenges I've ever seen on a City player by Stephen Hunt on Gelson Fernandes.
Ooh, I don't remember that.
It was absolutely, it will be somewhere. It was one for the ages. It was properly, I got there as soon as I could, ref. It was appalling. He might have even got sent off in the end, but it was an absolute shocker. But anyway, we were doing all right. We were still third in the league at this point, and we're cracking on for November now. And then we had the cup quarter final at Spurs again. We'd started to feel giddy. We thought, a couple of cup runs, that won't do us any harm. And then we faced what turned out to be a really strong Spurs side at home. I've got a few memories of that. What about you?
I'm sure, did they have a player sent off as well?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did.
So, I'm sure they scored and had a player sent off. And, Berbatov up front on his own was just unbelievable. You know, it was the first time that it felt like actually maybe we're not quite as good as we thought we were. You know, I think the Chelsea game where we got hammered, but you could sort of allow that because, you know, Chelsea again ended up getting to the Champions League final that year. You know, not too far removed of being back-to-back Premier League champions in 04 and 05, 06. But yeah, when we played that Tottenham team then, who I guess in our heads then were one of the teams where you're sort of thinking, well, can we be getting in that sort of top six? You know, really it was Tottenham, Everton, Villa were the teams that we were sort of looking at thinking, well, can we finish above them? Or could we get to a cup final?
And we looked miles off it that night, didn't we? Especially against the 10 men, as you say.
Yeah, they just knew how to play against us. I would say men against boys, but we looked very naive compared to them. And they ended up winning that year, the League Cup that year. So, yeah, I think up until that point, we, you know, getting to the sort of semi-finals and finals, which is something that we're really oddly very used to these days. You know, getting in a cup competition to a semi-final was not something I'd ever had in my life. So it was a really disappointing night.
I mean, we tried to sign Berbatov when our new owners took over, and more of him in a second, because I mean, he was a great player at the time, Berbatov, but he was getting better. But I remember a performance when City played Leeds away, when Leeds were at their peak of their powers. We'd just been promoted under Joe Royle. And Paolo Wanchope played up front on his own, as Joe Royle did, 4-5-1. And he just got off a plane from the Costa Rica International. And he absolutely destroyed that back four with Jonathan Woodgate, had Gary Kelly, had, forget who the left back was, a top-class Leeds side, and he destroyed them. We won 2-0. He was unbelievable. Whenever the ball came to him, he made it stuck, but he terrorised them. And Berbatov was very the same that night. Whenever they had 10 men, whenever Spurs got rid of that ball, it just hit him, and it absolutely stuck, and we just couldn't cope with him. But what I'll ask you is, we had a special guest in the crowd that night, and it wasn't Neri Castillo, who was unveiled that night as our new signing, who wasn't able to play for us until January because of the transfer window. Do you know who our guest of honour was that night? A man that would change our lives forever.
The only person I could possibly think of is Pep, but I don't know.
It was Khaldoon Al-Mubarak.
Oh, right, I didn't know that. No, go on.
Yeah, and it was even announced on the it was even announced on the tannoy that we are welcome a guest of honour, the guest of the chairman, Thaksin Shinawatra, and close friend Khaldoon Al-Mubarak. And we all had he wasn't introduced onto the pitch or anything, he was in the crowd, and we all had to applaud. And I'll never thought, it's a bit weird. Like, it was just like, one of those random things you think, I wonder how that'll come back to ever impact us. He was a guest of honour in the ground that night.
Wow, I never knew that.
Well, he was clearly sizing us up. Clearly, he was clearly sizing us up and bought us the year after. How did the next stage of that season play out? So we're still around third. We've obviously been a bit humbled by someone who we thought we should really be beating. A few draws, a couple of losses over Christmas.
Yeah. So the next three games after we got knocked out of that cup game were Villa away, who I mentioned earlier, were one of those teams that were trying to get in the top six. I think they probably did come sixth that season. They had a really good team at the time, Villa. I know they're doing well as we speak, but at that point they had a real sort of strong midfield four of Milner, Ashley Young, Stilian Petrov, and Gareth Barry.
That is strong, that, isn't it? It's decent.
Three out of the four of them ended up winning the title after they left Villa, and they had Bon Lahore and John Carew up front, who were a lot of pace with like Bon Lahore and strong centre forward in Carew. So they were a good team, Villa, and getting a draw away there 1-1 was a pretty good result for us. And then around Christmas time we drew at home with Liverpool 0-0, which again Liverpool were a top team. They've got to the Champions League final the previous season, so you weren't too disappointed with that. The one game that you would have been a little bit disappointed was drawing at home to Blackburn, where we came up against the manager of Mark Hughes and Roque Santa Cruz scoring both their goals. People that we'd see a bit more in the future.
What happened to Roque Santa Cruz? Did we sign him without a medical?
But yeah, we didn't get the win there. But I think we were at that point. I think we'd had something like 9 wins at home on the spin, which again just wasn't unthinkable from the year before.
Yeah, cool. And then so at this stage, you've done many aways. Have you done many aways that season?
I'm just having a quick look, but yeah, I mean, like I had gone to Villa away, just talking about that then. Tottenham, I went to that as well when we lost 2-1 in the league. Went to Wigan. Yeah, I mean, I'd done quite a lot of them so far. Fulham, I remember that quite well because that was quite a good game going back into September there. But that was again another one of those games where. You sort of can't believe how good a player like Martin Petrov was. He scored 2 that day, and he was just, in
the purple kit. Yeah. And then we beat one that sticks in the memory for me was Newcastle away, namely for the fact that it was, without question, the coldest game I've ever been to. It was 2nd of January 2008, and we actually won. Again, they were a good side, Newcastle, at the time. They spent a lot of money, and I think we bagged a couple. Was it Fernandez? Gelson Fernandez bagged, I think, in that game as well.
Fernandez. Well, yes, it was Fernandez. I think, was it Ishmael Miller came on and set him up? I think Alano got the first one.
Alano scored, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't go up to Newcastle for that one. But I've just got a really vivid memory of being in a pub in Bedford. And, this is before you had smartphones. So you were relying on, if you were out and about, you just had no idea what the score was for games. And I remember my dad texting me because he was, at home watching. And I remember him texting me saying 1-0 Alana. And then it must have been about 5 minutes before we made it 2-0. My mate who was sat next to me Seb, he texted me, but I didn't look at whose name it was. I just looked at the text message, and he said 1-1, but because Nicky Butt was playing for them at the time. And I remember just going, oh, for fuck's sake, like, wow, like going mad, and he was pissing himself because he just.
Bastard.
I was like, why have you just done that to me? So yeah, that's the only thing I can remember really about that. Yeah.
So I think I'd been on a bit of a poor run. We'd obviously stopped the rot with Newcastle. We were about 7th, so we got to the quarterfinals of the League Cup. And then we still had one cup, so everything was all right. I think we'd safely navigated the 3rd round. And then you said you were living in Sheffield, so did you go to Bramall Lane for the 4th round game?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, for people who aren't watching on YouTube, the look of utter disappointment on his face 18 years after the event. So we were at the FA Cup. We were convinced we were going to go on a run. And we faced what looked like a very, very winnable game at Bramall Lane, Sheffield United. So talk us through it. Talk us through your recollections of that absolute debacle.
Yeah. Well, because I lived at the time on London Road in Sheffield, so I was probably a less than 5-minute walk from leaving my front door to actually getting in the stadium. I didn't leave mine until about 2:45. I can't remember what time kickoff it was, but let's say it was 3 o'clock. I left mine like 15 minutes before kickoff, but I actually went with like 2 of my mates who didn't support City, but they were like, "Oh, can you get me a ticket?" So I managed to get them a ticket each, and I was probably about 4 rows from the front on the bottom tier, and yeah, there was a lot of hope, shall we say? Yeah, it was just one of those games really where we didn't play well, and one of the most ridiculous things that's ever happened right in front of my eyes, where they put the ball across, it hits a balloon, and
it would have to be one of our balloons as well, by the way.
Yeah. So yeah, literally the 2 things I can remember about being in that ground were just the ball hitting the balloon, and Daniel Sturridge
which is
scored.
not something I thought I'd hear on a podcast.
Yeah, and Daniel Sturridge scored right in front of us as well. So I can remember him doing his stupid fucking dance when. I think that got it back to 2-1, so we should be hit the ball up, run back to the centre circle, but no, he had to do his fucking theatrics. So not a great memory, to be honest with you.
And do you think that result, because it was over then, we had maybe Europe. Do you think that result very possibly planted the first seed of doubt in the chairman's mind and put the first nail in Sven's coffin, or do you think it goes back earlier, or do you think it's a much later decision?
It's a good question. I think it was probably a little bit later. I think if it had been around that time, I think he just would have got rid of him. I'm sure we'll come on to it, but I think there was a lot of games where we just didn't. The performances really went off a cliff. In a few weeks' time. From
around about that time, yeah.
Yeah. So I think he was probably okay with him at this very point, but I don't think we're not far off tasking losing faith in Sven, basically.
Yeah, and not far off at this point. Taxing going cap in hand to some of our previous owners to see if we could borrow some money, which didn't augur well for our financial future. But as you say, results started to fall off a little bit, apart from one notable one. But we'll come to that in a sec, because the January transfer window happened. And we were linked with Benjani for Portsmouth for, at the time, £9 million. And then he wasn't coming. And then he was. What do you remember from that?
I just remember being a bit underwhelmed with it all, to be honest. Because I think at the time, it was a signing that looked good if you look at the numbers aspect of it. That I think he. Yeah. Well, no, it's more so actually what he'd achieved so far that season. I think he was probably second or third on the top scorers list or something. I think it was probably I don't know, Torres and Ronaldo were probably 1 and 2, and he probably outscored Tevez or Rooney or so. He'd scored a lot of goals considering that he was playing for a more mid-table club. But then I'm sure he scored 4 goals against Reading when they beat them 7-4. It was one of them where he was not stat padding, but it was a little bit. He was
stat padding.
Yeah. It's whenever I talk about Gabriel Jesus, it's that last year that he had at City, he scored 8 goals or something in the whole season, which isn't a great return for a centre forward in a team that wins the league. But he scored 5 of them against Watford, which really gives you an indication of actually how much of an impact he had in the full season. So with Benjani, I just felt a little bit underwhelmed by it. And then you heard about this because at the time where I was living. I didn't have Sky Sports News or anything like that to sort of rely on. I had it the following year when there was the whole debacle around Kaka, which, mentioning Kaka and Benjani in the same context is a bit of a mad one, really. But
Only us, yeah, only us.
yeah, within a space of a year. But yeah, I just remember thinking, oh, I'm just not bothered about whether he comes or not. And I think, like a lot of City fans, I think we'd liked what we'd seen with Bianchi, but he was clearly a little bit homesick and wasn't really going to be there for the long haul. Bozjanov looked like a great player, but was probably going to be out for the rest of the season. So, you're thinking, well, if he gets back next year, do we need another striker? And Mpenza had been, pretty good for us, really. So, I didn't feel like there was a big need for bringing another striker in. So I just remember being a bit underwhelmed with Benjani, and this whole him falling asleep at the airport and it being on and off and off and on. I just it didn't really warm me to him, shall we say. But there is a remedy to making me warm to a player, which is when you score your first goal. Yeah. Well, it'd be scoring your first goal on your debut in the derby, which was pretty good, I would say. But I feel like my reservations about Benjani were overall proven because take away that goal on his debut, not a lot to talk about. Great celebration, which I did actually do with him on the concourse at Wembley about 18 months ago.
Right, his transfer was you can't pull the wool over people's eyes. He didn't want to come.
No.
Or if he did want to come, what we were saying is we were going to spend £9 million on someone who couldn't actually stay awake as a grown adult, which was a worry. In the end, weirdly and very oddly, in keeping with this season, we were allowed to sign him about 3 days later, but for £3.5 million, and not the 9 million that had been stated, which was a concern. But by this point, I think City fans had had enough. We didn't really want him. We'd made up a good song about him after what we're about to talk about. But generally for me, controversially, and I'm going to turn a lot of listeners and viewers off, the 5 that I'll no doubt get, is he's up there with Dickoff for me as you talk about a player and you talk about one game and you cannot talk about any other game that he ever played in at all. Now, if that's his legacy and he beat United, we beat United at Old Trafford because of him, then he's done far more with his life than any of us. Same with Paul Dickoff at Wembley. But that was it for Benjani. But we talk about the derby. So my memory of going into that derby was because it was the occasion that it was, which was the 50th anniversary of the Munich air disaster. As far as I was concerned, we'd spent 2 weeks being told that we were the absolute worst of the worst and we were going to ruin what was a commemorative occasion for the other team, and that no amount of asking fans to behave would work and that it would be an unmitigated disaster. And we were almost told how bad we were going to behave. Is that similar to how you remember it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember it quite vividly. Really. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I didn't think what happened would happen. I did feel like there would be, people disturbing the silence. I can remember that Sheffield United game with the balloon. I can't remember what it was it was something about City doing something at the Golden Jubilee. So I remember thinking, well, people are already singing about this game.
It doesn't all go well.
Yeah. So, even though I was reluctant at the time to say it aloud that I thought that things were going to happen, I definitely did feel like that it wouldn't be respected in the way it was. And, it did feel like, as you mentioned, probably like 2 weeks worth of articles, in the newspapers, like fan opinions online, because this was like at a time where like blogging and things like that started to really, sort of be part of fan culture. Not just fanzines, it was a lot of things online as well. And so it felt like it was, there was only one way it was going to go, and it was going to be us letting ourselves down, basically. But
do you not think it was? Do you not think it was? We were, as a fan base, we were poked and prodded and goaded for that 2 weeks to almost stoke it up by being told that's what was going to happen.
Yeah,
and it convinced most people that was going to happen. But come the day, completely different, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I say it was. It felt like they were trying to. I don't know. You don't want to sound a bit tinfoil hat when you say it, but it did feel like they were purposely trying to, poke the bear, so to speak, to try and get us, to react to it all. Which, I say we didn't, and. it's one of those things where it's so sort of strange to think about it now because I've been very fortunate to see City win at Old Trafford so many times, but that was the first time City had won there for 34 years. It's 1974 when old Dennis sent them down. But yeah, as far as
how good were we? How would you describe the performance? Because for me, it was just a constant battle, a little bit of luck.
Yeah.
But generally, I thought those 11 players couldn't have given a single bit extra that day.
Obviously, I despise Ferguson more than I'm willing to admit, but he turned to us and applauded us, and I think a lot of people said about how well, obviously the song that day was "We Are Impeccable." And
well, that's what he'd said. He was asked about that after the game, and he said, "Credit to the City fans, they were impeccable." Now, not that I'll ever need that man's words of wisdom about City fans, but he was spot on. And the other quote I heard around about that time is that, against Sven, he just brought a calmness and a respect to Manchester City that I don't think we'd previously had. And I think it was out of respect for him as well that we didn't want to let him down because he was going through it by this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it was just a very well remembered moment, I would say. And anyone that remembers it well, will always say that was one of the best days being a City fan. But yeah, going on to the actual match, very similar to the home game, to be honest with you. We defended really well. Richards, Anua, Dunn, Michael Ball, I think, played left back that day. They were really great. Joe Hart made some great saves. And, in a game like that, I mean, it's still the same when you go to Old Trafford or Anfield or the Emirates. When you get your chance, you've got to take it. And Vassell was probably very fortunate that his first strike was going wide, and
it was so bad.
And Van der Sar saved it for some mad reason, but he made sure that he scored on the follow up, and then the second goal, which you've already mentioned from Benjani, it was when the ball came back to Martin Petrov, he's offside. But we'll take it. And, it was very much a really stressful last sort of 20 minutes of the game.
Especially when, was it Carrick who scored?
Carrick scored in about the 90th minute. And it did sort of feel like it might be a little bit too late for them. But you just never know. We'd sort of grown up on United scoring last minute goals to sort of... But yeah, it felt like it's difficult not to sound really disrespectful, but we'd sort of ruined their party in a way.
It was their day, and we'd absolutely pissed on it. Yeah, but we couldn't win. We were either going to piss on it with bad behaviour or piss on it by beating them. I mean, but there won't be too many derbies where both teams are top flight, where there's such a gap in talent and a gap in ambition. And for that scoreline, it's still, as much as the occasion gets talked about, that win is one of our greatest derby wins of all time, in my view.
100%, yeah.
And made all the better for that celebration, as you referenced, because for him to go, and he was in front of the City fans technically, but how Old Trafford, for those of you who haven't been, is set is that there are fans at the front. There's a disabled enclosure, and then there are carers. And Benjani ran up to the City fans and just did his celebration in front of them. And the sheer vitriol that he got for that is even better than the celebration for me. It's beautiful.
Definitely. Yeah. It's excellent.
Fantastic.
It was just one of them great days. I got kept in the ground for about 45 minutes afterwards, and I don't think I'd ever been kept in the ground before until that point, which obviously made it feel like a bigger occasion than it was. I'm not sure, but and I got a lift back to Sheffield with my mate that I mentioned earlier, Seb, that I mentioned earlier. He gave me the news that Nicky Butt had falsely scored against because Seb was actually a United season ticket holder as well. You see, so
beautiful. I bet that was a nice journey, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So we had a good laugh.
Brilliant. Well, what wasn't a good laugh was the final stage of that season. So we'd had a big dip in form, surprise, surprise. And I think we'd gone down to sort of mid-table. I think we were 9th or 10th. Although we were still in the shout for Europe, it wasn't like it was now where you can finish 11th and still be in Europe. It was like, I think the first 5 or 6 teams, maybe first 6 or 7 teams, we were still in a shout for Europe. But then the noise started to happen about Sven and the sack, and that Shinawatra wasn't happy, and that things were beginning to leak. We had a pretty poor end to the season, didn't we?
Yeah, really. I mean, if you actually look at the fixtures after that win at Old Trafford, which was the 10th of February, I mean, we basically between then and the end of the season only win 2 more games. So yeah, it was pretty poor. 3 games, sorry. So yeah, you couldn't imagine now similar sort of time of the season where we are now. This is end of February when we're recording this, and to say that we'd only win two or three more games before the end of the season, it's just unthinkable with the team that City are these days. But yeah, there was a sort of combination of a few things. I'd say I think there must have been some goings on behind the scenes about Sven and his relationship with Taskin, and Taskin thinking he wasn't the right man to go forward with the club. But we had a lot of injuries as well. I know, all clubs can point towards injuries, but I think Michael Richards had gone off when we played Reading around that sort of time, and I think he was out for the rest of the season. For a lot of the year previously, I feel like Didier managed them really well playing in midfield, but I'm sure we ended up playing Sunjai in midfield around this sort of time. Or
we did.
Michael Johnson again picked up an injury, and I don't know. It just felt like all the positives over the season. I'm sure Corleek was having to play at centre half instead of right back, and it just felt like everyone was. We'd been sussed out as well. I think that's obviously we were speaking really positively about Sven, and he did the best he could. But I feel like once his first 11 had been taken apart a bit, we didn't really have much of a backup plan of how we played.
And would you say it started to feel how you referenced before about England, where it was all a little bit predictable, and his tactical nous had probably, or lack of, had probably been found out a little bit?
Yeah, possibly. I think when you look at the fixtures as a whole, when we were talking about the sort of autumn time in the season where we were very difficult to score against, and we always found a way to score. And we had players, Alano and Petrov, for example, who could find, had a bit of magic to find a goal out of nowhere. It just felt like the goals really dried up. So it felt a little bit like the previous season at times, where we were just really difficult to find goals, and we were definitely sort of players were playing out of position. It just came to mind then that when we played Portsmouth at home right towards the end of the season, Alano actually played at right back.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. Unbelievable.
Which, in the days of Pep Guardiola, having your really talented number 10 play as a fullback isn't too mad, to think of. But definitely our most creative player by a mile playing as a fullback because we had no other options. I mean, that says a lot about the actual state of what was going on at the time, really. But yeah, there's the end of the season. There's not a lot positive to talk about there. But the one game I will say which was positive was again a last minute winner. We won away at Sunderland, and again it was a really drab game for about 84, 85 minutes, and I think Alano scored a penalty to put us 1-0 up, and literally straight from kickoff they went down the other end and they scored a goal, so it was 1-1. And then in like the 92nd minute, it was. Do you remember when Robbie Fowler scored away at Norwich to score a last-minute winner, and it literally just trickled over the line?
Oh, exactly the Delia Smith game.
Yeah, the Delia Smith game, right? It was just like that at Sunderland away. Darius Vassell just completely scuffed it, and the goalkeeper just didn't get a grasp of where he was putting it, and it just trickled over the line. And because this is when at the Stadium of Light he used to be behind the goal, like just to the left of the goal. And I remember him like running into the away end. I was quite near the back, but yeah, it was scenes, as I think the kids would say. Yeah, so that was one of those really great moments towards the end of the season. I remember getting the train back to Sheffield after that, just being like, oh my god, that was like such a high to get a last minute win away from home. But yeah, the rest of it not great.
A rare spotlight, a rare light in the misery of the end of that season. And then the big one that we're going to come to before we wrap up, we'll be talking about the Borough game. But that Fulham game at home, for me, was an absolute sickener because they were going down. We were gone 2-0 up. Yeah. We were in absolute shambles that game. And then Danny Murphy turned into peak Andrea Pirlo and won them the game.
Yeah. Funny enough, I've actually spoken about this before on a Blue Moon podcast, Heaven and Hell game. I wasn't supposed to talk about it, but I mentioned it just because there's two things that really stand out to me about this game, which aren't about the actual match. But 2-0 at half time, and they were gone. And you just felt like second half, we'll just keep the ball for a bit. And I think at that point we probably still could have been looking at top 8 maybe, which would have been a good end to the season. And two things, obviously we ended up losing 3-2, which was really shit. But I don't know if you remember this, but around that same sort of time, City had sent you a season ticket with like a MasterCard chip on it, and they put £10 onto your season card.
Oh, imagine them doing that now. Jesus,
Yeah,
no
well,
chance.
yeah. So I remember that it was like the last home game of the season. So you basically had £10 to spend, and I don't know if this is just how I've remembered it in my mind, but there's the way I
This is
remember it is
I have zero recollection of this, which is brilliant. I love
right.
this.
So how I sort of remember it in my mind, I'm not sure if this was actually how it happened, but just how I've retold this story is me and my uncle had like 10. Well, before the game, actually, we got a drink in the ground where we spent like, because this was when, I think a bottle of cider in the ground was like £2.50 or something like that,
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
it was quite a long time ago now. We hadn't, things weren't as expensive as they are now. And it was that same day was Chelsea were playing United at home, and Chelsea won 2-1. Michael Ballack scored both Chelsea's goals. And I remember this is when I used to be in the East End level two. And I remember when Ballack made it 2-1, it was fucking going off on the concourse, like everyone, because everyone had this like
yeah.
free drink that was got, right? So everyone
Beautiful.
celebrating. But then afterwards, we got beaten, and we still had like £7 or something like that to spend on our card.
It was
So we
our
got
last. It
like
was last home game, wasn't it? Because we
yeah,
had
last
two
time game
away
of the
games
season.
last
So,
year.
so
Yeah.
it was a bit of a use it or lose it on these with this Mastercard thing. So I think we had like sort of two. They kept the bars open after the game as well. This is my memory. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but this is just how I remember it. That they kept the bars open afterwards, and we ended up getting 2 bottles each of this like cider, whatever it was. And this was when after the match, Taskin was trying to flog a car on the pitch, and
Brilliant.
it was all very Alan Partridge
It was
like.
dark.
There was about 5,000 people left in the ground, and 1,000 of them were probably Fulham fans. And he was trying to like, yeah, I can't remember what the car was.
That
It's a
is
bit hazy.
unbelievable.
Yeah, and I remember just like looking out onto the pitch and just seeing the stadium probably like 10% full, and he was on the pitch trying to sell a car, which was all
Bleak.
very odd.
That's
Yeah,
really bleak, isn't it?
yeah,
Notwithstanding the performance, and then we
yeah,
go to Liverpool, obviously get our usual beating, and then Middlesbrough. So by this
yeah,
point, we've got people in Sven masks. We've got banners saying "Save our Sven." We've got
yeah,
blue trilby away fans singing "Leave our Sven alone." Hey,
yeah,
taxing, leave our Sven alone. I mean, the full Burt lineup of reaction. Um,
yeah.
you would have thought that might have lifted the players who knew he was going, albeit they had a weird end of season tournament to play because they were contractually obliged to. You'd have thought for the travelling fans, the players would have put in a performance, and then what happened?
Well, yeah. So after that Fulham game, which was the Saturday, I think, on the Monday night, that's where it was leaked that it's very likely that Sven's going to be losing his job at the end of the season. And there was anger from the fans. And I remember I didn't go to Anfield, but I remember there was a lot of Sweden flags in the away end there, and it was the same at Middlesbrough. I went to that game, left Sheffield, and it was a real early summer, lovely day in Sheffield. And I got to Middlesbrough, and it was like being in Bodo. It was just bleak and cold, and just it wasn't
Horrible.
great. Yeah, really horrible weather, freezing, and the two. I think you'd hope, as you say, that the players would have played well for him, because sometimes you have these examples of manager knows he's going, and the players just like especially when they've enjoyed themselves under him, which according to the famous story about Didier Mann having champagne with Sven. People tend to think that the players really quite liked him, but they didn't play well for him at all that day.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we had to sort of play for was being in the Fair Play League. That was our one route left that we could get into the UEFA Cup the following year. So Richard Dunn getting himself sent off after 10 minutes wasn't really
Just bit
ideal.
vintage. It's just vintage
Yeah,
City, that, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, what I would say is there was a lot of backing to Sven, but generally, I think even though we got absolutely hammered that day, the away end was really quite positive. And I think because it's such a meme regarding the look on Michael Bull's face, looking devastated that we're losing 8-1, and the whole before Arab money sort of thing. But actually, if you were there on the day, you didn't really see it like it was just an end of the season, no one really gives a fuck sort of thing. It's just a shame that it actually sort of boiled over a bit at the end. You know, people were doing like the fucking conga right on the front of the stands, and someone fell over the advertising hoardings, and police started like using the batons when, you know, there was no aggression.
No, it was never like that at all.
So yeah, it sort of took a bit of a nasty turn that day, unfortunately. And I remember getting back to Middlesbrough train station and someone telling me that, because I was wearing a late 60s home shirt, and someone saying that I had like blood splattered on my back. So which was a bit of a surprise. So it was one of those days where it's sort of used or weaponized by other fans as in like, oh, look how shit you were. But actually, it was a real sort of who gives a fuck when, you know, on a season which I've generally quite, you know, spoken quite warmly about, I'd say.
Yeah, you have, absolutely. And talking of that season, you did a brilliant job of giving us the context of prior to that season. But post that season, how important, or how do you look back on that season in the context of what was to happen over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it definitely made me feel like the following season was, you know, it felt like it was quite difficult to get excited about things in the same way. You know, when Robinho came in, you know, the takeover and things like that, I guess a lot of people were getting carried away at the time. And I always find it a bit mad that, you know, from the takeover happening in September 2008 to we won the league 2012, and that's such a short period of time to go from the club that we've just been talking about for the last hour to you know, the team that were title winners. So, but at the time, it didn't feel like it was a short period of time, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, when we brought in Robinho, and then in that January, like Nigel de Jong, Shay Given, Craig Bellamy, all these like sort of well-established players, I guess it just made you think, well, you know, there's a good chance this could happen, but you don't really know, which sort of ties into as the reason why I got the, some might say, flag made around that time, because there was so much noise around, you know, City are going to take over here. But I think it was, let's see it first before we start like living that. So, you know, that was, you know, the song, some might say, and, you know, the line, we might find a brighter day, it just really fit in well with how people were talking about City, like a bit like the sort of the Munich thing we talked about earlier, how, you know, people were presuming things but without the actual, nothing factually has happened. And so I think the sort of the knock-on effect of the Sven season was, you know, enjoy the good times as much as you can, but, you know, the runaway train can sharply put its brakes on, sort of thing, and that's
as it tended to do throughout our history.
Exactly. So, you know, I guess there was a little bit of living in the, well, this could all end tomorrow, which I think is a big reason why I've not stopped going so much, because it could all, you know, all this, you know, we could find out tomorrow that we're guilty of these 115 charges and we don't play in Europe ever again. You know, so
Enjoy
is why. So yeah, exactly. You know, 3 hours ago, I was watching the last 16 draw of the Champions League, and I sort of felt disappointed. Oh fuck, we got Real Madrid again. But it's like, you got to take a, you know, pinch yourself sometimes about what all the shit that we've seen. The one thing I'm just going to mention, just to sign off on the 07-08 season, is because I don't think this is a really well-known thing, and I don't actually know if it's factually true. I have heard it on a podcast before, and I have asked Nader Manua this before, but apparently they had a post-season tour in Thailand, the players.
That's right, yeah.
Sven hadn't been sacked at this point. So he was, even though it was well known that he was about to lose his job, he hadn't actually been sacked. And there is an anecdote, or, you know, about what happened out there, that they were in some Thai karaoke bar, and Taskin was singing "Should he stay or should he go?" and pointing at Sven. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I like to think it's true.
I mean, that's incredible, and it is the most Swales-like non-Swales story I've ever heard, but also an unbelievable way to end what has been a really enjoyable chat with one of City's current greats in the supporting community. So
thank you.
Liam Wright, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really loved it. And I will see you soon. Take it easy. Thank you very much.
See you soon, mate. Cheers for that. Thanks.
Cheers.
Mate.
See you later. Bye-bye.